my channel reviewing Master and Margarita, The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. So, the main themes, yes, I took some notes. Hang on, bear with me, where did I took quite a few notes, where am I? Yes, sorry, I should be more organised, here we are. Yes, the main themes in A Master and Margarita. One of the main themes is the value of courage over cowardice. So, most of the characters in the novel show varying degrees of cowardice. For example, in the Pontius Pilate narrative, Pilate displays cowardice when he sends Jesus to his death, because, and by the way, the Pontius Pilate narrative can be more overt in its criticism of authority because of the distance, and the fact that it wasn't set in Russia. Bulgakov could be a bit more overt in his criticism of authority, in a way that obviously he had to be a bit more careful in his Moscow narrative, which is why he uses the magical realism device, so he can try and be satirical without being too satirical, because otherwise he could get into trouble. But even so, it's still censored though, so... But yeah, Pontius Pilate actually deeply regrets sending Jesus to the gallows, because he realises that Jesus is essentially harmless, and is just, you know, he sees him as kind of like a sort of mad philosopher, but nothing more than that. And he deeply regrets sending Jesus to the gallows, and this then is like a guilt, you know, on his conscience. And Pilate, but he displays the sort of sin, if you want to call it that, of cowardice in sending Jesus to the gallows. Conversely, though, the Master and Margarita exhibit courage because they stick loyally to one another through thick and thin, putting themselves at some danger to be with one another because they have true love, authentic love. But most of Moscow displays varying degrees of cowardice. For example, self-interest, greed, and dishonesty. And this collective cowardice ultimately then strengthens the status quo, because no one's standing up against the state regime. Roland, Satan, exposes this cowardice via the chaos that he creates in his visit to Moscow. The state-approved writers, for example, Berlioz and also Ivan, are cowards because they're more interested in the fine food and holidays, their pampered lifestyle, when they're saying anything daring or genuine with their art. So their art, their poetry, whatever, if it's not even really poetry, it's just not art, it's not genuine. Whereas conversely, the Master, his art is genuine. The Master is writing about Pontius Pilate. He wrote a novel about Pontius Pilate, but it received such criticism from the members of Mazalit that it couldn't be published, and consequently the Master went mad. He went mad, he got sick, he ended up in a psychiatric clinic, Dr. Stravinsky's clinic, along with Ivan, because he just couldn't bear it. He couldn't stand the fact that he couldn't write freely. He couldn't stand the fact that he'd been so harshly criticised by the state regime for writing true art, basically, for writing authentic art. Hence why he's called, he's like a master. He was actually called the Master, if I remember, by Margarita, his true love, who called him the Master, and Margarita was deeply enthralled to the book that he was writing, and she would, she encouraged him on with his writing and called him the Master. He's like a master of true art. Yeah, so, as I say, I've mentioned Pilate's cowardice, sending Jesus to his death. Yeah, he regrets his decision, he's plagued with guilt, and then Pilate spends 2 millennia dreaming of walking with Jesus and having a conversation with Jesus. Because he basically, he's like in a sort of state of limbo where he's just sitting with his faithful dog Banga at his side, staring at the moon for millennia, dreaming of walking with Jesus along a beam of moonlight, and dreaming that the execution never took place. Yeah, so Margarita obviously also represents courage over cowardice because of her deeply held desire to help others, which then drives her on to find the master when the master goes mad, and because of, because that kind of shows that basically anyone in Soviet Russia who was true, who was authentic, who did stand up for what they believed in, would be labelled by society as mad, basically. So that's what that represents. And also, Margarita agrees to host Satan's ball. She signs a pact with Satan, the devil. She gets turned into a witch. I love that scene. She gets turned into a witch. And she agrees to host Satan's ball, which puts her at some risk, some danger. But that again shows her courage. And her reward is to be... her reward for that, for signing a pact with Satan, is that she gets to be with the master again. The other main theme, linked to the first one really, is of art and authenticity. So for artists belonging to group Mazalit are inauthentic because they spend more time gorging on food than on writing. And I mean, the only way for any white association to exist in Soviet society is to have the favour of government, to write things that meet your approval of government, which of course is no longer propaganda, it's not really literature, and that contrasts with the authentic art as created by the master, his intellectual independence. So the master represents authenticity and sacrifice. This novel almost kills him. The next theme also, which I thought was particularly interesting, is the ambiguity of good and evil. The novel very clearly shows that each requires the other. You can't have good without evil and vice versa. They're interlinked. And that's also displayed very much in the character of Roland the Devil. Like, we often think of the devil as a 100% evil character, but actually the novel shows that he's ambiguous, that he's not 100% evil, but actually the devil, he has a kind of generous side as well, and everything he does in Moscow he's not doing evil for evil's sake, it's not gratuitous. What he does is, through his conjuring tricks and dark magic, is he brings out the evil that's already there, like latent beneath the surface, but he brings it out into the light of day, as it were. So the evil that's already there beneath the surface can then be shown. So that's his role, but it's ambiguous because morality is complex. You can't, in order for there to be good, you need to have its opposite evil in order to know what good is. And life is all about constantly trying to kind of courageously fight for little evils of the everyday, but you need to have those little evils in order for there to be courage and in order for there to be good. It's kind of what the novel is kind of saying. It's complex. Like, no one's 100% good, no one's 100% evil sort of thing. It's complex. It's not a simple divide between good and evil. And that's encapsulated in the opening quote from Faust, which says, "Who are you then? I am part of that power which eternally wills evil and eternally works good," showing the complexity of the devil. It's not as simple as the devil being on the side of evil. and Roland's targets tend to be those who are most prone to be sinful behaviour, so those who are materialistic and greedy. So he's not just like wanton violence, he doesn't like literally target everyone in the same way. He particularly targets those people who are most, if you like, sinful. A bit like it's almost a bit like Roland himself as an artist, like an authentic artist, because they use the power of spectacle to highlight the compromised morals of the populace. And as we know, greed and pride are, of course, two of the deadly seven sins, which are well and live in Moscow. So it's the exposure of the populace's sin, if you like. Which I thought was a very interesting philosophical argument here. As Roland later says, what would your good do if evil did not exist, and what would Earth look like if the shadows disappeared from it? Shadows are cast by objects and people. Do you want to skin the whole Earth, tearing all the trees and living things off it, because of your fantasy of enjoying bare light? That's what he says to Jesus' disciple Matthew. You need to have shadow. Yes, and also, as I say, authentic love, which I've already mentioned. It's another major theme